Good morning. The day my son was born was the best day of my life. I've certainly had other memorable days, including the birth of my daughter nearly 2.5 years ago, 2.5 years later. It's so much easier doing this virtually. But the second Dylan came into my life almost 30 years ago marked the beginning of my new role as a father, a role that came after great anticipation. It also came with great anxiety. Thank goodness, being a father comes with a guidebook. Here it is, 101 Ways to be a Special Dad by Vicki Lansky. I found the book earlier this month while cleaning out my office, tucked away on that shelf of books dedicated to other forms of self-improvement where it languishes for years. When my son, who was 2 years old at the time, gave it to me in 1994, it's very possible that the scribbling just inside the cover are his inspiring words to me like, "Okay, Dad, you've got one chance." The date Susan added with Dylan's inscription indicates that the book was given to me on Father's Day 27 years ago today, just weeks before my daughter was born. I'm sure I took great inspiration and practices from the book in the months and years that followed. When I found this book, I found another one my daughter Julia gave me for Father's Day about 20 years later. Dads Are the Original Hipsters by Brad Getty. Maybe this book was Julia's assessment of me and my role as a father after more than 2 decades of practice. While an interesting book, it is my daughter's inscription inside the cover that tells it all. Proof that you're cool, with 2 exclamation marks. Seriously though, I wish it had been that easy. Fatherhood was a role that came with many questions, not least of which was, could I meet the challenge? From the moment Dylan was born, I knew that being a parent was a role I would have that would likely never change and would be with me until the moment of my last breath. Even when my father was in his 80s, he reminded me that parenting never ends. When I was growing up, "It takes 2 to tangle" was a phrase my 4 siblings and I heard a lot from my father, usually after any 2 of us were involved in a skirmish. 2 to tangle, I later found out, directly applies to my becoming a father, which was only possible because of my wife and longtime partner, Susan. Susan not only shared the same great anticipation and anxiety as me in becoming a parent, but in the months leading up to that best day of my life, handled the incredibly important job of pregnancy, which both me and my body refused to do. Whatever I say this morning in the role of father, I say with complete reverence and gratitude to Susan for allowing me to have this role. On this Father's Day, I have to say the biggest influence on me and my role as father was my father. Dad was the middle of 5 children of a Mennonite father and a Quaker mother, and a child of the Great Depression. When he was just 4 years old, his family was dust bowled out of Kansas, too many years trying to farm with too little rain. They moved to Illinois, dairy cows and all, where his parents had the built-in support of the local Mennonite community there. Despite their pacifist leanings, when my father graduated from high school shortly after World War II, without any significant plans, my grandfather urged him to enlist in the military, rather than be drafted and sent to Korea with a rifle, which my grandparents thought was his likely path. And so my dad enlisted, marking the beginning of a 22-year career in the United States Air Force. The military took him and our family all over the country, including a couple of international assignments. Along his journey, he got married and became a father. 5 times, in fact, all born over a period of roughly 7.5 years. Like my father, I was also the middle child, which in retrospect was not a bad place to be. As a pilot, Dad was gone a lot, his longest absence being nearly 10 months in the 1960s, while he completed his part in his obligation to his employer, flying in and out and over North and South Vietnam on 132 missions. Despite the absences, some of my fondest memories growing up with Dad is that Dad would always take his vacation time in the summer. We would load up whatever trailer or camper we had at the time and head off for a combination of domestic sightseeing and camping for a few weeks at a time. These trips represented the time when my brothers and sisters and I had complete access to Dad, and Dad's attention was on us. I should add, during our time growing up, Dad never talked about his military work, and especially his time in an active war zone. Not to his children, anyway. And somehow we knew better than to ask. When his eyesight and age finally took him away from the cockpit, Dad left the Air Force and decided to try running his own business. Ironically, the business Dad chose was the sales and service of recreational vehicles, which perhaps after an Air Force jet was the one other form of transportation he felt most comfortable with. And I now think that somehow working with RVs gave him connection with his family, even while at work. Unfortunately, the trailer and camper business years were awful. That business nearly destroyed his health and my parents' marriage. His years running the RV business with his laser focus on being the family provider was a failure by any measurement when it came to having any kind of balanced life. During those years, he literally disappeared from our lives, even though we still shared the same house. But regardless of how bad it was, his failings and the years he spent trying to recover became a valuable lesson for his children. I know it was for me. I lost my father 7 years ago, but I will never forget what his disappearance during those years taught me. Now, back to my little guidebook here. I'm excited. Next month, Susan and I are driving to Oregon, and we're picking up Dylan and Julia, who now both live and work there, and taking a trip. First to a national park for some hiking and sightseeing, then to the coast to play on the beach, do some tide pooling, skip some rocks, and maybe fly a kite. It turns out all of these things are in my guidebook. In fact, I'm taking this book with me to see what other great ideas there might be. We will probably also do things not suggested in the guidebook. Instead of juice boxes, maybe do some wine tasting, downing an ice-cold beer or other adult beverage. And we'll talk, and most importantly, listen. We'll hear about their angst with jobs, relationships, their futures, as well as the future of our country and our planet. Throughout it all, I'm a very grateful father, and I look forward to practicing the best lesson that I learned from my father, just being there for my children, for parenting never ends. And with that, I would like to introduce our next father this morning, James Watson.
I guess conveniently, I pet my cat this morning, so I can blame all of my allergies on that and not going through this. I do want to preface all of this by saying that I owe most of what I've learned to be a father from my wife, Heather. It's been with her guidance, patience, nudging, and cajoling to get me to where I am today with my children. Throughout our nearly 12 years of being parents so far, there's been so much that our children have done that I wouldn't have seen or appreciated without such a caring partner in this experience. So please, don't think that any of my valuable lessons learned so far have been done in a vacuum without her, as well as others to help me along the way. So, to start, how did I first learn to be a father? Well, I was given, and I read, the Expectant Father book before our first child was born. which mostly helped to reassure me that even as I constantly worry that I'm this close to doing irreparable harm to my baby, they're remarkably resilient, bendable, and bounceable, to make it that much harder for dads to mess things up too much while they're learning the ropes. Even after we were past the diaper phase, I've noticed my kids to be remarkably amenable to my most boneheaded actions and efforts. I've also found humor to be a strong bond that I've created with my kids. As all of my kids have learned to read, I've enjoyed seeing how excited they all are to get the newspaper in the morning and read the comics. It's even taught them patience, since they need to wait for their siblings to finish before the page can be passed to them. It's been fun to see them use comics to not only wrestle with understanding humor and jokes, but also cultural references and family and social dynamics discussed in those comics. How they each respond to humor has been an interesting way to see how they are growing up and developing their own personality and preferences. When I was growing up, my entire family loved reading and talking about Calvin and Hobbes, and I've been so happy to see my own children carry that forward with each other in discussing Calvin and his wild adventures with his stuffed tiger. As they've gone from needing diapers changed to walking, to riding bikes, to reading, to schoolwork that I can't always solve, the biggest decisions I've needed to make are not how to get them to the next step myself, but how to let them get to that next step. Nearly everything is about teaching them how to fish, rather than simply fixing the problem and handing over the answers. Not that I'm perfect at this. There have been so many times that I just want to step in and help them get something done. But I know that my kids sometimes need to get through those things themselves and have me around merely for encouragement and support. Simply listening and helping them guide themselves to a solution can be so rewarding, even if my first instinct is to swoop in. I've also found that the Cub Scout motto of "do your best" to be helpful to remind myself that even without all of the answers, if I can put in the effort, time, and patience, my kids will work around my shortcomings. I've tried to make the effort to get as close to the answer as my kids needed, and I would like to believe that my kids recognize that I'm trying to do the right things, even as I struggle to do so. At this point in my path to fatherhood, I realize that now I need to prepare myself for the future when they are independent of me. My oldest is not even 12, so I know I have much more to experience, but he is already old enough for me to see how my kids are stretching themselves to become independent. Even our youngest is doing it in his own way. It was earlier this year when our 3-year-old insisted that he needed his own knife at dinner because he was going to cut that slice of ham without our help. I'm not entirely sure how ready I am for that. I do appreciate, though, that for now, I'm still able to make them breakfast in the morning and kiss all of them to bed each night. They know that I will be there to help them get their day started and be there when the day of excitement and adventure has come to an end. Someday they will leave our house, and I will no longer be physically there day in and day out. But I will cherish this time as much as I can until then. Thank you.
The lines from David Bowie's song describe parents as kooks who care for, nourish, and guide their newborn child. But there's a catch. With parents like that, the child may be pretty kooky too. Although Sharon and I don't think of ourselves as kooks, so to speak, we parented in our own way, in the way we thought best for our sons. We found our own way as parents, and our sons certainly reflect our parenting, as most children do. I suspect most parents do the same as they learn what it's like to be fathers and mothers and to raise their children. Looking back over almost 40 years of being a father and now a grandfather, I think learning to be a father requires sensitivity to the needs of your children and your partner, realizing that change is constant and what worked yesterday may not work today, and continuing to experiment. When I first became a father, my training consisted of watching other fathers, but for me, that was a rather haphazard process. I had a few role models with my own father and relatives and with close friends of my family, but it wasn't a very focused study. I suppose there were books I could or even should have read, but didn't. Unlike Paul, I didn't get those kind of helpful things, although I didn't seek them out also. I'm kind of want to ask you how long it took you to read that first one, but I don't want to. Yeah, I figured. I was actually more concerned with getting Panda wallpaper up in our son's room before he came home from the hospital. Literally, after he was born, I started putting it up. So it was a little bit of a last-minute kind of thing. Then Craig and Sharon came home from the hospital, and it was game on. How is a new father supposed to play that game? I described the first few days as stumbling forward, just doing the best I could. The first anxious night spent trying to make sure Craig was still breathing. Did we feed him enough? What else should we be doing for him? All these questions were out there, and no one but Sharon and I to answer them. If there was any consistent theme, it was to try to figure out what Craig needed, and importantly, what Sharon needed. They were certainly the main characters in my new life, and becoming sensitive to their needs was key to helping our family. Infants are cute, interesting, and lots of fun, until they're not. I spent an hour on an airplane with an unhappy, crying infant son, feeling like we had disturbed the whole world because I didn't know he had an earache. But I learned, so next time the earache came around, it wasn't such a mystery. Complexity blossomed when our younger son Eric joined the family. We had another child to parent, which was routine until it wasn't. As Eric grew and became more active, the interactions between the brothers meant moving between nurturing to guiding, and then sometimes calling a truce because they had their inevitable collision courses. And they were different. They responded differently. Craig was mortified to be in timeout, that he had done something wrong. Eric had a different approach. He would sit in the designated chair, laugh at us, and basically say, "You can't hurt me." So we had to customize our parenting for two different personalities. Again, it's observing, anticipating, and trying to help our sons navigate through life with each other, schools, and friends. Sensitivity to what they needed and wanted while balancing our time and resources was a constant in our lives. I rarely got it right on the first try, but usually kept trying and tried to get better each time. Fortunately, our sons were good students, moved through school and on to graduating from college. But again, they were different. Craig came home from school, did his homework, and if there was time, he went out to play. Eric came home and did everything possible that was fun until he could finally squeeze a little bit of homework in before he went to bed. So Eric got a little bit more oversight. Not that we ever thought it did all that much good. When they graduated from college, I said, "Great. This fatherhood gig is going to wind down. It may be just about over." That was wrong. It wasn't that simple because we were still in their lives and they in ours. Now, they're grown. They don't need daily involvement and handle their normal lives pretty well on their own. But every once in a while, something comes up, and the issues are a little different than they were when they were young. And they're much more complex and much harder to address. So as a father, how do you deal with this? I think the big key is trying to figure out when it's appropriate to suggest, not to tell, but to suggest a solution. Then continue to be sensitive as to whether it actually was helpful. It's not easy, and again, all I think I can keep doing is trying. Now we have a turn with a 3-year-old grandson, and he's been a big part of our lives. He's a joy for us, and we love to spend time with him and watch him learn and grow. We're retired so we can really focus on him and just enjoy him. And although we try to very carefully help, we don't have the ultimate responsibility to raise him. In summary, I certainly don't believe I've been a perfect father, but I'm not sure I've ever met one. The flexibility to change and keep learning have been key to any success I might have had as a father. Sometimes the rewards are obvious, but some are unexpected. Eric was talking with a couple of my friends a few years ago about growing up and said, "My brother and I always knew that when we had a game or a big school event, my dad would be there for us." Just a simple recollection, but one that brought me to tears to know that it all been worthwhile. Thanks.